ever since I've been in the corporate HR space, I've just naturally always tried to understand the why, like stay really curious. I never have tried to come into a conversation and just know it all. So I always come from a place of help me understand and let me say it back to you, because that's step one for me to be effective at my job and in helping roll something out or strategize around it. If I don't understand the what it is and the why, I can't be very helpful. So I always come from a place of help me understand. And then if things don't add up, I ask a lot of questions to get that full picture of what we're really trying to do. And there's times, obviously, through questioning where you make tweaks, like someone hasn't thought through that, or they didn't realize there were additional risks to consider, or even just different ways of thinking about it. So I think just staying grounded in curiosity and asking questions from a place of not resistance, but just I want to help get to the right outcome. And that's been really a big part of my leadership style from the beginning.
Welcome to Return on Empathy, a podcast brought to you by the Empathy Collective, a community where leaders come together to navigate change without losing their humanity. Whether you are a plant manager trying to humanize the factory floor, a small business owner wanting to build a strong culture that lasts, or a corporate executive striving to prevent burnout in your team, you belong in this community. Visit theempathycollective.com to join the waitlist for our community and use the discount code ROEPOD104 to get 10% off your membership. There's a moment many of us have experienced at work when we realize that what's happening isn't really about performance or process or even change. It's about whether we feel seen, whether someone is willing to slow down long enough to understand our context, whether we're treated like humans or like functions in a system. Today's conversation is about that moment. My guest is Maggie Brady, VP of HR and Talent at Whitecap, a company that supports more than 11,000 associates across 500 branches in one of the most operationally demanding industries there is, construction. And yet Maggie doesn't talk about empathy as a leadership trend. She talks about it as a human necessity. In her words, the fact that we even need to call it workplace empathy says a lot about how far our systems still need to evolve. In this episode, we explore what it really looks like to lead with curiosity instead of urgency, to have honest human conversations during organizational change, and to recognize the profound influence leaders have in people's lives. This is Return on Empathy. Welcome to the show, Maggie. It is really a delight to have you here. I know we share a few things in common, not just a passion for empathy in the workplace, but we were both competitive swimmers in college. And I know that experience, I'm sure, shaped who you are as a leader today. Getting up at 5 a.m. and jumping in a cold swimming pool for a couple of hours every morning. It takes a certain human being.
It does.
To show up and do that every day, show up for yourself and for your team.
Yes, it does. And that's why I'm happily retired.
Me too.
Yes.
Well, thank you for being here. I always like to get to know all of my guests and their career paths because I find it incredibly fascinating. You know, how did you get to where you are today? And I'd love to know how empathy played a role in that career journey as well. It's a great comment that you made offline to me recently. Why are we still calling this a workplace skill when it's like literally part of being human? So I'd love to understand how that perspective on empathy has shaped who you are as a person and your leadership journey.
Yeah, I love it. No, thanks for the opportunity. This is definitely a fun topic. You know, I'm passionate about it. It kind of happened over time. Like it wasn't like I had this clarity of thought that said, I'm really passionate about empathy. You know, it's been just over the course of my whole life, but definitely in the corporate experience of the past 20 years or so, where I think I became more aware of it because I realized it was one of my strengths. My success and the type of work that I do was because it was a natural strength for me. And so I get that it's not a strength for everyone, but it can be. And I just think the more that we normalize it and talk about it and make sure it's just as important as any other critical leadership skill, you know, that's where I think we can really start to change the experience at work more consistently.
And I think that just ties into your comment about the fact that being empathetic is being human. It's not something that you just wake up one day and you realize, I'm really passionate about empathy. It's just part of who you are as a human. So how did that play out in your career journey?
So I was a psych major, econ minor. I was fascinated with the human mind and human behavior. I didn't know what to do with that degree. And my dad actually helped me kind of oriented me towards, hey, there's this thing called, because he was in business and he was like, there's industrial psychology and organizational behavior. You might want to go into consulting to get more exposure, and that could be a path for you. And I was so grateful because I had no idea what those things were. And so I did start my career in change management consulting with Arthur Anderson when it was still around. And so I do think I gained a lot of skills, as you do when you're in like an early career consulting gig, right? You're just kind of drinking from the fire hose, but you're exposed to a lot of complex business challenges, working closely with these clients who are going, in my role, they were going through large scale transformation, systems implementations, job redesign, change management around all of that, training, communication. I got exposed to all the complexities that go into making that type of change successful. And I learned firsthand by the type of work that we were doing in partnership with the client was how much we had to slow down and think about each of the different associate profile, like associate segments that were going to be impacted by change, and really put yourself in their shoes and understand what's changing and why, what's in it for me, and really be empathetic to what we were about to communicate to them and how we were going to change things for them. And how do you make that as seamless as possible? And so that's really, I think, was so formative for me because I only consulted for 2 years and I realized I wanted to be in-house somewhere and not a road warrior, 5 days a week. But that was so formative. I think I shaped something in me that I couldn't unsee, that I didn't want to unsee. Ever since I've been in the corporate HR space, I've just naturally always tried to understand the whys, like stay really curious. I never have tried to come into a conversation and just know it all. So I always come from a place of help me understand and let me say it back to you, because that's step one for me to be effective at my job and in helping roll something out or strategize around it. If I don't understand the what it is and the why, I can't be very helpful. So I always come from a place of help me understand. And then if things don't add up, I ask a lot of questions just again to kind of get that full picture of what we're really trying to do. And there's times obviously through questioning where you make tweaks, like someone hasn't thought through that or they didn't realize there were additional risks to consider or even just different ways of thinking about it. So I think just staying grounded in curiosity and asking questions from a place of not resistance, but just I want to help get to the right outcome. And that's been really a big part of my leadership style from the beginning.
I love that. I mean, it just makes me think of my 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Yes,
And
yes,
some of the
yes.
you have to ask why at least 5 times to really understand the situation and
Yeah.
understand what the other person is going through, and then you can
Yes.
drive the change.
That's
So,
right. That's
act like
right.
a 6-year-old.
I love it. I mean, keep it simple.
I understand not wanting to be a road warrior and be on the road all the time as yeah, consulting work is challenging. When you moved in-house, what was the biggest difference or maybe the biggest challenge for you? What
Yeah.
changed when you moved in-house?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. After I made the decision to leave consulting, I did go back and get my MBA. And then I joined GE's HR leadership program. So I was very laser focused on to go in-house. I wanted to supplement um, just my business acumen because I could tell I was feeling a little bit insecure. So having a liberal arts degree, but then going into business, like it's a little intimidating for some. I mean, it was for me at least early in my career. So the MBA helped, I think, in a lot of ways. And then GE had this great pedigree, and I just really, it was really important to me to get that experience because I knew that even if I could end up staying at GE or not, but it would just give me that foundation that I thought would really differentiate me. So that was a rotational program. So I went through recruiting. I did some Lean Six Sigma work within the recruiting space, which was really cool. Had an HR partner, business partner rotation, and I actually did a rotation outside of HR in marketing. And then off program, I went into like a full-time HR manager role. It was a global role at GE. So the biggest shift from consulting into in-house was definitely, well, one, you had to get deeply ingrained in the business in a way that's different, I think, than consulting, just because, and maybe it was the nature of my role, like what my role was when I was in those consulting engagements, but, I was like an analyst level, right? So I had big picture context, but in the HR partner role, especially, you are embedded in that part of the business, that functional group or a business unit team. And you really need to take the time to understand how the work gets done how the roles are organized, the different dynamics, the people who are in these roles, how they work together. So there's a lot of listening and observing and figuring out how to build relationships in a meaningful way. So a lot of flexing too. And I think that was just very new to me relative to what I had experienced in the consulting side. So there's things that HR naturally has to do and processes that we have to drive. I wanted them to not see me as an HR person. I wanted them to see me as a leader who represented the HR function. And that's been, I mean, there's been so much progress, I feel like, over the 20 years in terms of the view of HR. Every company I've worked at, there's been at least some subset of the leaders or associates who this is a new model of HR for them. And so I have to do a lot of like educating, but in a more subtle way. But hey, it's like, hey, me and my team can offer this type of service to you. And I don't use those words, but I've had a lot of aha moments, like seeing people have a lot of aha moments like, oh, I can come here and bounce ideas off of you and we can brainstorm together and it's okay. It's safe. And so it's just been, that's the part of the job that I really love.
I love that evolution, like seeing how you went from the consulting side to in-house, and the focus was highly centered on building relationships and also just probably breaking down stereotypes on what HR
Yes.
is. I mean,
Yes.
coming
Yes.
back to
Yeah.
your comment on the aha moments, because I think a lot of
Hmm.
people, I mean, my time spent in corporate, there was this perception of what HR does, what their role
Yeah.
is, and sometimes it's not clearly defined, even though in the HR team they think it's clear.
Yes.
So that's great that you were able to create more clarity around that and make
Hmm.
people feel like they're in a safe environment to just come bounce ideas. So it's not just HR dictating what's going on. This is
Yes.
what you do. This is what, this is our new initiative. So I love that. Going back to empathy as a strength and a muscle that you've really flexed throughout your career. Let's talk about your current role at Whitecap, because
Hmm.
you're the executive level HR role there. It's a large organization, 11,000 associates across 500 branches and 15 construction trades. So, very complex environment. And you're looking at not just balancing these different types of employees in different locations, but there's also speed that's valued, safety is important, operational execution. So there are all these things that take high priority. How is it empathy embedded into a system like that? And how do you ensure that it doesn't become this thing on the side or something that's overly diluted or performative? How does it become ingrained in
Mm.
the complex operation that you currently work in?
I know it's such a great question, and it's a complex one because at the end of the day, there's not. It's not like you can. It's not like there's a program you can roll out or like training. Empathy. One, it has to be modeled at the top, which I think is actually where there's a lot of misses. I'm very fortunate to work at a company where I feel like our senior executive team has a ton of empathy. They're great humans, emotionally intelligent. That is not always the case. And so that I'm grateful because I think it makes it easier in my current situation to highlight that and to reinforce it because it's so visible. And modeling it is like, again, being authentic, being vulnerable as a way to build trust. And it's also slowing down just enough to give the right people the right context, to be clear on who owns what. Because if you just think about, it's not just about going and executing that thing. You want people to really be in it, have skin in the game and feel passionate and feel empowered. That requires just, again, at the front, being very thoughtful about who's hearing what when. Are you clear on what they need to do and by when and why? And so that's the type of behavior I'm talking about. And it's also the day to day and just more informal things of checking in. How are you doing? And meaning it and not just jumping straight into, a one-on-one agenda or the latest fire drill. So it's really just creating space. At Whitecap, what we've done is we spun off from our parent company 5 years ago. We had an opportunity to revisit what do we want our mission, vision, values to be, our culture to be. And we were very intentional about it. And so we have what we call our inclusive culture. And there are specific leadership behaviors that apply to any level. It's self-leadership at its core. It's, a growth mindset, listening, active listening, considering each other's well-being as a whole person. I don't think we don't use the term whole person, but, being mindful that people have lives outside of work. And so I think the fact that we identified those and talk about them, it's important because I think that helps raise awareness of it and also gives us a platform, right? A common language to say when you see someone not doing those things, it's a little bit easier to have that conversation because you can reference back to say, hey, these inclusive behaviors that are so foundational to our culture, this is what this looks like. And this is, I think, how you can maybe do more of it or do something a little bit different to be more effective. I think that's very empowering to have that as a tool.
I mean, that's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to revisit the mission, the vision, the values. I've had conversations on this podcast with leaders who've taken that exercise very seriously, like you have. And my question always is, how do you make it something that's not just a poster hanging on the wall
Yes.
saying,
Yeah.
teamwork and a bunch of people climbing a mountain and saying, there's no I in team. So I love that you've made that exercise very intentional. And going back to what you said about role modeling, having the leaders at the top role model those values and
Yeah.
demonstrate what that looks like in the day to day. So then the people below them can say, yeah, okay, that's what that value looks
Yeah.
like. I'm going to work on that. You talked to me about a really huge reorg that you took the company through. How do you hold on to those values? How do you ensure people are still seeing the vision and the mission as you're going through a major change like that? How do you hold those close and also to your point about creating space during a time when it's probably very tempting to pick up the pace, meet the
Yeah.
milestones, get from point A to point
Yeah.
B as quickly as possible. I'd love to understand what that journey looked like for you.
Yeah, and this is as hard as big organizational change is, including, anytime there's reductions in force, which wasn't necessarily the case with this reorg, but just a lot of times those do go together. Um, there's always this sense of urgency, and I take my role, especially now at this stage in my career and how much I've seen, my role in any of those implementations is to make sure we are staying centered on we are impacting people's lives. They didn't ask for this. It goes back to those same basic questions I mentioned earlier. What are we doing and why? How do we link it back to our strategic priorities, our overall mission and vision? You got to tell a story. Storytelling, is so powerful and it's so important. It also signals that this has been thought out. This wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction. So from the beginning, it just starts to help with the change management, right? Try to minimize the resistance to change wherever possible. I think connecting the dots and making sure that that messaging is kind of tied through and everyone's on the same page around that. The other piece of my role that's really important to me when we're going through these kind of org design discussions, sometimes people say, oh, you just changed it. You just moved the boxes on the page and changed some titles and like nothing's really changed. And that's valid. That is an unsuccessful transformation initiative. In my role, in my team's role, it's to go into those conversations with trying to connect dots, see around the corner, think through the different stakeholders and how they might respond to this. Like, would this hold true? Like what you're saying? And so just really thinking about all the different implications. So I do think that's a really unique role of HR. I think we're well positioned to do that, to see around corners and anticipate, because we just have such a wide purview of different parts of the organization. And sometimes leaders obviously have a really broad purview too, but it's, when you're in it and in the day-to-day operations and tons of pressure, I see how it's easy to forget to just slow down and ask some of these questions or to think about how this might land with a certain part of the org. So I always kind of make sure we push through that and have a clear communication plan. And that we're tailoring it. It's not just a vanilla plan that's rolled out uniformly. It's like really thinking about who needs to know what, when, and why. And that's part of being a good change agent, a good influencer. That was my general philosophy when I go into that type of work.
If you are loving this conversation with Maggie, this is exactly the type of stuff we will be diving into in our brand new online community, the Empathy Collective. We are hosting a special launch event on July 15th at 12 p.m. Eastern, where you will meet some of the founding community members and hear a live panel discussion from 4 of our former podcast guests. Check out the show notes for a link where you can RSVP for this event. We can't wait to see you there. I love that because I've been through reorgs myself. I led change management for a restructuring, and I think the biggest misses that leaders encounter that they don't realize themselves is the communication. So you mentioned don't have a vanilla
Yeah.
communication strategy.
Yeah.
It's very tempting to just have boilerplate messaging that goes out through internal comms and then, okay, we've done
Yeah.
communications, we're set, have a couple of town halls and maybe some all hands, and then we're good to go. But yeah, like you said, different teams are impacted in very different ways by the change. Some teams only have slight changes, other teams have completely new leaders at
Yeah.
the top and the structure is completely upended. So you really have to adapt that communication strategy to groups and even individuals. And in the case, how did you equip people leaders to have those individual conversations with their employees? Because I will say that's the one part that in my experience, leaders struggled with in change
Mhm.
management because they've kind of taken a blanketed approach across the organization with communications rather than zooming in on those
Yeah.
one-on-one coaching conversations that should be happening between manager and employees. So how do you address
Yes.
that?
I'm having visions of all the times I've been, like, knee deep in a spreadsheet, mapping out every single conversation, who needs to have it, and what are the key messages. But that's so it's exhausting, but I've seen it over and over now, like, that level of detail is what ultimately leads to the success. Just carrying that example forward, my team and I, like, we would meet with different leaders and literally talk about the different conversations they had to have and kind of help them think through how's this person, what do you anticipate their response is going to be? You typically have a good gut instinct if it's going to be neutral, positive, or really, upset or surprised. And so then, through that kind of discovery work, you start thinking through, okay, now is there like a pre conversation that we need to do to kind of like, just there's all these different tactics you can take. So, but it's really individual. And you also have to think about the informal influencers, culture carriers. There's all different buzzwords for them, but it's real. And, making sure you know who they are, and how do you get them on board too to help because, no matter how good your communication is, if there's influencers who aren't bought in, it really I have seen that. Like, because I've seen it more times really help versus I haven't really had examples where I think someone really was vocally against what was going on. But I think when you have people outside of leadership who are like, oh, this makes sense. I get this. And well, here's like the good thing about this. It just helps reinforce and give it credibility to hear it from peers versus always top down.
Yeah, and how do you find those people?
It's definitely more art than science. I think there's always just one, like me and my team through interactions will kind of have observations. And if we don't know for sure, I've talked to different leaders before being like, who do you see on your team as just being like really highly collaborative and like kind of a team player and just tends to want to get the team moving forward. There's just always some of those natural cheerleaders. Sometimes I'll ask if I don't know, and we'll think about how to specifically leverage that person. Not, and I don't, leverage is a weird word too, but it's a missed opportunity. I guess if you don't talk about it and think about the role that they could play, even if it's informal.
I love the way you describe them as cheerleaders because there's actually research that's been done at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business on what they call positive energizers. And they have a whole center on positive organizations, and they've discovered that the more positive energizers you have across networks, the more resilient the organization is as a whole. So bringing those
Yeah.
positive energizers out of the woodwork is really key because they're the ones who are going
Yes.
to advocate on your behalf for sure.
Yes. Yep. I love that.
Cool. So I'd love to wrap up the conversation with a fun exercise. And we've been doing this for the past few episodes. It's something new that we've been doing this year. For those of you who are listening for the first time and you haven't heard about the concept of passing the empathy torch that we're doing this year, what I wanted to do was create more interconnectivity between guests. You, Maggie, are a senior leader in HR. The guest before is an associate professor at a university in the Netherlands. So she passed a challenge over to you. So very different backgrounds, very different perspectives on empathy, very different workplace environments where empathy is being used. And I think the more we can connect all of you, the collective intelligence is incredibly high amongst all of you, and also just the collective empathy. So I really want to bring all of you together with this challenge. So I'll have you first, Maggie, respond to Therese's challenge, and then I'll have you present a challenge for the next guest, and I'll share the response with you once I have it. So, just as a refresher, Therese's challenge was one that I hear quite a bit. She leads very high in empathy, and her whole program and her students, they're studying learning and development in organizations. So, empathy all around, right?
Mhm.
But something that comes up often because a lot of her students are already working because they're getting their master's degree, and you experienced that because you went out and got your MBA. So they're getting firsthand work experience already, and they're seeing where empathy oftentimes shows up as a weakness.
Been thinking a lot about compliance, relationships, what is the basis for how we interact? And one question that I have for the next guest, and I'm very curious to hear their response, is that it might feel showing empathy or focusing on relationships in interactions with people that have power over you, that have a more transactional view, that have maybe a more compliance view of things, might be seen as weakness, even though it's not. How can we make sure that empathy shows up as a strength and is not going to be interpreted as a weakness or something to exploit? And I think that is an important question, to have compliance and relationships exist together harmoniously rather than making it seem like they're pursuing different things. There's nothing wrong with softness, but the way it is spoken about has devalued what it means and what it stands for, and that is a pity.
I have several examples, unfortunately, from my work experience at across different companies. It was just specific individuals that it was not enjoyable to interact with them. Luckily, I've gained confidence, and so I think I progressed through those different scenarios in a healthy way. But I just remember early on, just because of my own insecurities and just self-doubt, I kind of took it, And so I learned though how to stand firm in my self-worth and my empathy. So I guess to answer that question directly, when that's happened and I'm not in a position of power and I'm dealing with someone who is just not demonstrating empathy, I now I recognize it instantly. I mean, before any words are said usually. And I know just to stay grounded, like self-regulate. So, I'll feel the body's triggers of, my heart rate's going up. I'm feeling a little nervous. I don't feel like there's good trust here. Those things are all happening so fast before you can even name it. So I just make sure that I'm staying grounded on how I want to show up in that moment. And again, going back to the very beginning where I will stay calm. I ask clarifying questions. And it's maintaining my own personal power by not reacting, actually choosing to respond. It's a subtle shift. And I stay rooted in like, at the end of the day, we all want to get to the best outcome. At least I do. I think we all do. And so just making sure like there's ways to show up and ask questions that are thoughtful and they are credible. And it's not to be defiant or resistant. That's why I don't worry so much anymore about it being viewed as a weakness, because I'm so confident in the intent behind what I'm asking, or how I'm responding. So a lot of that, it's hard to summarize it. I think it's a little bit of a personal journey too, and how you develop over time, just in life in general, and then that overflows into how you show up at work. So for me, those things have personal development and healing have gone hand in hand with my leadership evolution too. That's how I would handle that scenario.
I love that. I mean, it sounds like what you really try to do is stay authentic to who you are,
Hmm.
and it's not about a power struggle or anything like that. It's more tuning into
Yes.
your current situation. How are you
Yep.
feeling? Taking a few breaths and not reacting. I think that
Yes.
that's so easy to do. I've been a victim of that so many times where I'm so frustrated with the lack of empathy coming from the person that
Yes.
I'm working with, that I just want to react, and that's never ever ends well.
Yeah. I love that you said the authentic piece. I think that's the key to everything. So much we talked about today, from how you communicate, what you communicate broadly to individual and interactions. As long as you're staying rooted in your authentic self, like that is a form of empathy. Because if you're authentic, it creates space for someone else to also be authentic. So I love that you called that out.
I think that also plays to what you were saying about role modeling and leadership. Part of that is remaining authentic to who you are, not trying to put on a facade or wear a mask, because that also sets the example for other people in the organization
Yes.
to do the same. So I'd love to hear what your challenge is for the next guest.
Yes, I love this. This is such a great idea. Okay, so for the next guest, it kind of goes hand in hand with this perception, right, of empathy as a soft skill, which we got to retire that whole
I agree.
terminology. We talk a lot about empathy, and that's obviously, I know, especially prevalent in my day to day, is accountability, execution, ownership, and I think they oftentimes are perceived, or it really feels like they're in conflict, or there's overemphasis on accountability, and the natural reaction is at the expense of. And so I obviously want to change that narrative because they don't need to be opposites or in conflict. How do you hold empathy and accountability at the same time without sacrificing empathy or lowering your standards?
Mm, that is such a good question. And it makes me think of some work that I've done with a customer service team recently, where we had them take the Clifton Strengths Assessment, and I don't know how familiar you are with
Yeah.
it, but there are 4 domains, right? 4 domains of strengths, and 2 of the domains are executing and relationship building. So empathy sits in the relationship building domain, and this particular team was incredibly strong in relationship building, and also in execution, with a few of the team members, like, just knocking it out of the park with execution.
Mm,
Our advice actually, to the group, because they were struggling with empathy and accountability, look at your team members who are
yeah.
really, doing well with execution, have them help you. And to your point, they're not separate.
Mm-mm.
It's not like, "Okay, we only execute," or "We only have empathy,
Right.
we don't get anything done."
Great.
Cool. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you for taking me through your career journey, for taking me through some of your change journeys during your time at Whitecap. I love that you're infusing empathy across your organization in a really productive way that also promotes executing and getting things done. So I think your story here is a great example of that, creating that balance. So kudos to you for that.
Thank
And
you.
thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to share your insights with my listeners.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we connected, and that was a lot of fun. So I look forward to hearing the future podcasts.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And if you would like to join the Empathy Collective community, visit theempathycollective.com and use the discount code ROEPOD104 to get 10% off your membership. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.